much do you think this advanced operating environment is worth? Wait just 1 minute before you answer.
Hour after hour today, wave after wave of selling hit the stock market.
If you were a kid in the 1980s, playing video games and exploring computers was a big deal. Clicking on the first drop-down menu was thrilling. Maybe you were born a bit later and missed out on those experiences. Still, the 80s had a big impact on how we live today. It was a time of relative peace, allowing science and technology to move from academics to homes. But it wasn't all calm. There were significant global events, both good and tragic. The 80s are remembered for being socially and economically conservative, yet also marked by excess. Join us as we delve into 13 famous events from the 1980s you probably forgot.
And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
Ronald Reagan, the 40th President of the United States, served from January 20th, 1981 to January 20th, 1989. He won the presidency in 1980 with a significant victory over the incumbent, Democrat Jimmy Carter. Reagan, a Republican from California, was re-elected in 1984, defeating Democrat Walter Mondale in a landslide. His presidency marked a shift towards conservatism in American politics, with diminished confidence in liberal programs that had been dominant since the 1930s. Reagan's domestic policies, known as Reaganomics, included major tax cuts, reduced non-military spending, and deregulation. These policies, inspired by supply-side economics, led to budget deficits and increased federal debt. Notable legislative acts during his tenure were the Tax Reform Act of 1986 and the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. In foreign affairs, Reagan pursued an anti-communist stance, implementing the Reagan Doctrine to counter Soviet influence globally. The administration increased military strength, supported missile defense systems, and intervened in Grenada in 1983. Controversially, Reagan's administration funded Contra rebels in Nicaragua through covert arms sales to Iran, leading to the Iran-Contra affair. Despite criticism for budget deficits and wealth inequality, Reagan is often ranked among the top American presidents. His supporters highlight his contributions to economic recovery, the end of the Cold War, and a restoration of American confidence. Reagan's impact on American conservatism has led to the characterization of the period during and after his presidency as the Reagan era. As Reagan led America through conservatism and global challenges, another historic event unfolded in 1981, the launch of the space shuttle Columbia. What role did space exploration play in Reagan's presidency? Let's find out.
America's first space shuttle, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
The STS-1 mission marked the inaugural orbital spaceflight of NASA's Space Shuttle program, launching the Columbia orbiter on April 12, 1981. Piloted by Commander John W. Young and pilot Robert L. Crippen, the shuttle completed 37 orbits around Earth before returning on April 14, 1981. This historic mission was the first crewed American spaceflight since the Apollo-Soyuz test project in 1975. STS-1 served as the maiden test flight for the Space Shuttle, which was designed to carry a crew. Following atmospheric testing of the orbiter and ground testing of the overall Space Shuttle system. The launch coincidentally occurred on the 20th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's Vostok 1, the first human spaceflight, due to a technical delay that pushed the launch 2 days beyond the planned date. The crew selected in 1978 consisted of experienced astronaut John Young, who had 4 prior missions, including walking on the moon during Apollo 16, and Robert Crippen, a rookie from NASA Astronaut Group 7. Young, also serving as the chief of the astronaut office, recommended himself as the mission commander. Crippen, having previously participated in Skylab missions and the Apollo-Soyuz test project, became the first from his astronaut group to fly in space. The significance of STS-1 extended beyond being a space milestone, reflecting technological advancements and paving the way for future shuttle missions in NASA's space exploration endeavors.
Acquired immune deficiency syndrome. No one with AIDS has been cured.
The AIDS epidemic, caused by the human immunodeficiency virus, reached the United States in the 1970s and 1980s. It was first noticed when doctors observed clusters of Kaposi's sarcoma and pneumocystis pneumonia in gay men in Los Angeles, New York City, and San Francisco in 1981. The primary way to manage AIDS is through multiple antiretroviral drugs and education programs to prevent infections. In the initial stages, foreign nationals with infections were turned away at the U.S. border to curb the spread of the disease. Over the years, the number of AIDS-related deaths in the United States has decreased significantly. Still, certain communities like African Americans, Latino Americans, homosexual and bisexual men, and intravenous drug users continue to be disproportionately affected. As of 2016, 1.1 million people aged 13 and above in the U.S. were living with HIV, with 14% unaware of their infection. By 2018, approximately 700,000 people had died of HIV/AIDS in the country, and around 13,000 individuals with AIDS were losing their lives each year. However, advancements in treatment and preventive measures have led to a substantial decline in death rates. In New York City, the overall death rate among those diagnosed with HIV/AIDS decreased by 62% from 2001 to 2012. Despite the progress, efforts to address the epidemic and reduce disparities in affected communities remain crucial for continued improvement. As the AIDS epidemic reshaped the 1980s, claiming lives and sparking societal changes, one can't help but question how MTV, a channel born in the same era, contributed to shaping cultural narratives. MTV, short for music television, is an American cable TV channel that started on August 1st, 1981 in New York City. It's part of MTV Entertainment Group under Paramount Media Networks and Paramount Global. Originally, MTV showed music videos and other related shows hosted by video jockeys. MTV is recognized for playing a key role in the popularity of cable TV in the 1980s, with many people getting cable just to watch MTV. It became one of the first American cable channels available internationally, gaining a global fan base. In the 1990s, MTV Animation had hit shows like Daria and Beavis and Butthead, which became cult classics. Over the years, MTV shifted its focus from music and animation to reality TV for teenagers and young adults, though it started to bring music back in 2016. In the late 2010, MTV mainly aired a show called Ridiculousness, which took up a significant part of its programming. MTV has influenced the creation of various sister channels in the U.S. and affiliated channels worldwide, some of which have become independent. As of January 2017, about 90.6 million households in the U.S. had MTV in their cable packages. Despite changes in its programming, MTV remains a significant player in the entertainment industry. On March 30, 1981, the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, was shot and injured by a man named John Hinckley Jr. in Washington, D.C. Reagan had just finished speaking at an event and was heading back to his car when the shooting occurred. Hinckley believed that by attacking Reagan, he could impress the actress Jodie Foster, whom he was obsessed with. Reagan was hit by a bullet from a gun that bounced off his car and struck him in the chest. He was hurt badly and had to go to the hospital. He almost died, but doctors were able to help him, and he eventually got better. Even though he was hurt, he didn't give up his duties as president. Other people were also hurt in the shooting, including White House Press Secretary James Brady, a Secret Service agent, and a police officer. Brady was hurt the most and had brain damage that left him disabled. He died later, and his death was linked to the injuries he got from the shooting. Hinckley was found to be not guilty because he was considered insane at the time of the shooting. Instead of going to prison, he was sent to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. In 2016, he was released from the hospital after doctors said he was no longer a threat. The shooting was a frightening incident, but Reagan survived and continued his presidential duties. It underscored the hazards faced by people in influential positions, and it also drew attention to the issues of mental health and gun violence. As President Reagan faced the aftermath of the assassination attempt, a pressing question lingered. How would the nation's economic policies evolve? Little did he know that the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981 awaited, transforming the fiscal landscape.
Bringing it up with you. The sun has been shining brightly here.
The Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981, also known as the Kemp-Roth Tax Cut, was a big law passed by the U.S. government to cut taxes and boost the economy. It was made during the time of President Ronald Reagan and was a significant part of his plan to stimulate economic growth. The law included something called the Accelerated Cost Recovery System, which was later changed in 1986 to the Modified Accelerated Cost Recovery System. Before Reagan, politicians like Jack Kemp and William Roth, who were Republicans, tried to pass a similar tax cut, but it didn't work. When Reagan became president, he made cutting taxes a major goal. Even though the Democrats controlled the U.S. House of Representatives, Reagan convinced some Democrats to support the tax cut. The law was passed on August 4, 1981, and Reagan signed it on August 13, 1981. It was one of the biggest tax cuts in U.S. history, and along with another law in 1986, is known as the Reagan tax cuts. The law lowered federal income tax rates for everyone. The highest rate went from 70% to 50%, and the lowest rate went from 14% to 11%. It also lowered estate taxes, capital gains taxes, and corporate taxes. Some people think the law made the federal budget deficits worse, but others say it helped the economy in the 1980s. There was a belief that the tax cuts would bring in more money, but instead, tax revenues went down, and the government had more debt during Reagan's presidency. In 1982, some parts of the 1981 law were changed by another law called the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act of 1982, which increased taxes. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger faced a tragic accident that led to the loss of all 7 crew members. The shuttle disintegrated just 73 seconds into its flight, breaking apart 46,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean near Cape Canaveral, Florida. This marked the first fatal incident during an American spacecraft's flight. The mission, known as STS-51L, was the 10th flight for the Challenger orbiter and the 25th for the Space Shuttle fleet. The crew's objectives included deploying a communications satellite, studying Halley's Comet, and carrying out the Teacher in Space program by taking Krista McAuliffe into orbit, which drew significant media attention. The disaster resulted from the failure of O-ring seals in a joint on the shuttle's right solid rocket booster. The seals lost effectiveness due to low temperatures during the launch. As a consequence, pressurized gas leaked, causing the shuttle to break apart mid-flight. Despite efforts to recover the crew compartment and shuttle fragments from the ocean floor, no survivors were found. The aftermath led to a 32-month pause in the Space Shuttle program. An investigation by the Rogers Commission revealed organizational and decision-making flaws within NASA, along with overlooked technical concerns about the O-rings. In response, NASA established the Office of Safety, Reliability, and Quality Assurance, and modified its satellite deployment methods. A new orbiter, Endeavour, replaced Challenger in 1992, featuring improved safety measures for subsequent missions. The Challenger disaster remains a pivotal event in space exploration, prompting vital changes to ensure the safety and reliability of future missions.
That reflects the total commitment of the American people and their government to fight the evil of drugs.
The Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 was a law created by the U.S. government to address the growing issue of drug abuse, particularly during the war on drugs. President Ronald Reagan signed it into law after approval by Congress. This law changed how the legal system dealt with people on supervised release, shifting from a focus on rehabilitation to a more punitive approach. The act also made it illegal to possess substances similar to controlled drugs and introduced mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenses, including marijuana. The catalyst for this law was the rise of crack cocaine and the deaths of prominent individuals like Len Bias and Don Rogers due to cocaine use. This prompted U.S. Representative Thomas P. O'Neill Jr. to lead the effort in creating a comprehensive anti-drug bill, responding to public concern and media attention. The legislative process involved competition between the Democratic majority House and the Republican majority Senate to propose stricter laws leading up to a crucial midterm election. One significant impact of the Anti-Drug Abuse Act was the substantial increase in drug offenses with mandatory minimum sentences, aligning with the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984. The Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, which reshaped drug policies in the U.S. by enforcing stricter measures, coincided with a significant global event, the fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9, 1989. What ensuing global shifts accompanied this symbol of unity?
Have been pouring through the world non-stop, delirious with joy, the East German...
On November 9, 1989, something significant happened in Germany. The Berlin Wall, a big barrier that separated East and West Berlin, was destroyed. People from both sides came together, and it was like a symbol of the end of a tough time known as the Cold War. This Cold War was a period of tension between different countries, and the Berlin Wall was a physical representation of that divide. This event was part of a larger movement called the Peaceful Revolution. It was a time when people were pushing for positive changes, and it led to the fall of communism in many countries in Central and Eastern Europe. Before this, there was a movement in Poland called the Solidarity Movement, and it was like a domino effect. One thing led to another. After the Berlin Wall came down, the border between East and West Germany also opened up. It was a big deal because families and friends who had been separated for a long time could finally be together again. About 3 weeks later, leaders from different countries met at the Malta summit and declared that the Cold War was over. It was a moment of peace and unity. The next year, in October, East and West Germany officially became one country again. This whole process is called German reunification.
Recent congressional hearings on the Iran-Contra matter until the hearings were over.
The Iran-Contra affair, also known as the Iran-Contra scandal, was a big problem in the United States when Ronald Reagan was the president. Between 1981 and 1986, some important people in Reagan's government secretly helped sell weapons to Iran, even though there was a rule saying they couldn't. The plan was to use the money from these sales to support a rebel group called the Contras in Nicaragua, who were fighting against the government there. The U.S. government said they were selling the weapons to Iran to free American hostages held by a group called Hezbollah in Lebanon. This idea came from an Iranian arms dealer named Manikar Ghorbanifar. Later, it was found out that some of the money from these weapon sales was secretly given to the Contras in Nicaragua by a guy named Oliver North. When this all came out in 1986, President Reagan admitted on TV that they did sell weapons to Iran. But he said it wasn't to trade for hostages. The investigation got messy because a lot of documents were destroyed or hidden. Eventually, some people in Reagan's government were charged with crimes, including the Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger. But in the end, many of them were pardoned by the next president, George H.W. Bush. The person in charge of investigating, Lawrence Walsh, said there was a lot of deception and cover-up by people in the government during the whole thing. The Iran-Contra affair was a big deal and caused a lot of problems for the U.S. government at the time.
Good evening. Today is Black Monday, the day the Dow dropped more than 500 points.
Black Monday, also known as Black Tuesday in some parts of the world due to time zone differences, refers to a global and unexpected stock market crash that occurred on October 19, 1987. During this event, the worldwide losses were estimated at a staggering $1.71 trillion. The severity of the crash raised concerns about prolonged economic instability and the possibility of a recurrence of the Great Depression. Several factors contributed to the initial decline in stock prices. Investors were worried that stocks were overvalued and due for a correction. Persistent U.S. trade and budget deficits, along with rising interest rates, also played a role. Another factor was the decline of the dollar, coupled with doubts about the effectiveness of government efforts to address this issue. In February 1987, major industrial countries signed the Louvre Accord in an attempt to stabilize international money markets through coordinated monetary policy. However, doubts about the accord led to a crisis of confidence. The use of portfolio insurance hedging, employing computer-based models to trade index futures in different market conditions, and contagion of fear may have further accelerated the market fall. The impact of the stock market crash on the broader economy depended on each nation's monetary policy response. The central banks of the United States, West Germany, and Japan provided market liquidity to prevent financial institutions from defaulting, limiting the impact on the real economy. However, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand's refusal to loosen monetary policy had significantly negative and enduring consequences for both its financial markets and the real economy. As the global financial landscape crumbled on Black Monday, economies plunged into uncertainty. Meanwhile, back in 1985, Microsoft unleashed Windows 1.0, ushering in a new era of computing.
A card file, a notepad, a clock, a control panel, a terminal, a print spool, a RAM driver, and...
Windows 1.0 was the first big version of Microsoft Windows, a computer system made by Microsoft. It came out in the United States on November 20th, 1985, and in Europe as Windows 1.02 in May 1986. The idea for Windows 1.0 started when Bill Gates, the person who helped create Microsoft, saw a similar program called VCon in 1982. They showed the Windows system to people in 1983, but it took 2 more years to actually release it. Windows 1.0 works with MS-DOS, another computer system, and it lets you run programs made for Windows and also ones for MS-DOS. It was the first time multitasking where you can do more than one thing at a time, and it also used a mouse. There were some problems with Windows 1.0. Some people didn't like it because it didn't meet their expectations, and there weren't many programs that worked with it. Also, it didn't let windows overlap on the screen, and they had to be organized in a certain way. But some people liked it because of Microsoft's early presentations and because other companies supported it. Windows 1.0 had a few updates, with the last one being version 1.04. After that, Windows 2.0 came out in December 1987. Microsoft stopped supporting Windows 1.0 on December 31st, 2001, making it the version of Windows that was supported for the longest time.
Imagine video like you see in the movies. Graphics you want to reach out and touch.
The personal computer, as we know it today, has a fascinating history that kicked off during the microcomputer revolution in the 1970s. Unlike mainframe computers, which rely on staff to manage user requests and time-sharing systems where a single processor is shared among multiple users, personal computers were designed for individual use. The breakthrough came with the development of the microprocessor, making personal computers affordable for the average consumer. Initially known as microcomputers, these early personal computers were often sold in kit form and had limited availability. They piqued the interest of hobbyists and technicians. The term personal computer has a disputed origin. Some credit the first use of the phrase to a 1968 Hewlett-Packard advertisement for a programmable calculator. Others claim that computer pioneer Alan Kay, Whole Earth catalog publisher Stuart Brand, MITS co-founder Ed Roberts, and Byte magazine all contributed to popularizing the term in the early 1970s. In 1975, creative computing defined the personal computer as a standalone system with enough processing power and storage to meet the needs of an individual user. This definition marked a shift as personal computers transitioned from niche gadgets to accessible consumer goods. The journey of personal computers reflects a remarkable evolution, from niche hobbyist interest to becoming an indispensable part of our daily lives.